Welcome back to Outlaw Operations, where every story draws you further into the quiet corners of the human soul, the places where shadows speak louder than light. Tonight's journey is one of love tainted by ambition, and a dream slowly unraveling into a web of deceit, betrayal, and heartbreak. Before we begin, I'd like to offer my heartfelt gratitude to each one of you, our incredible subscribers and loyal viewers. Your continued presence here means more than words can express. And if you happen to be among the 94% who join us without subscribing, I extend a gentle invitation. Why remain a visitor when you can become part of the story? Click that subscribe button, and walk with us through these haunting tales. Your support not only fuels this channel, it becomes a part of the narrative we're building together. Now, make yourself comfortable. Tonight's story is one you won't soon forget. It was a quiet, chilly night in the northern part of California. The kind of night where the fog creeps just a little too close to the window panes, and the air outside carries a strange kind of stillness, as though it's waiting for something to go wrong. In a small town nestled between sleepy hills and narrow streets, 12-year-old Liana Claus was hosting two of her best friends for a cozy sleepover. The girls had spent the late afternoon laughing over costumes, flipping through teen magazines, and trying on lipstick shades they weren't allowed to wear in public. Her mother, Eva, had said yes without hesitation. Liana loved sleepovers, especially in autumn when the world outside looked like a painting, orange leaves blanketing the yard, wind whispering through the branches. There was comfort in those evenings, warmth in the small things. Liana had been especially excited that day. She had even helped her mom prepare an inflatable mattress for all three of them so they could sleep side by side. Her room was cluttered with teenage chaos. Scrunchies, popcorn bowls, old movie VHS tapes. The girls were planning to watch something spooky, maybe even sneak in a ghost story or two, but none of them knew that the true horror was already lurking nearby, watching through the trees. By around 10 p.m., Eva retreated to her bedroom. She had a headache she couldn't shake, so she swallowed 2 sleeping pills and left the girls to their laughter. "Wake me if you need anything," she mumbled as she closed her door. It would be the last time she'd ever speak to her daughter. Somewhere past midnight, maybe closer to 12:20 a.m., a scream split through the silence of the house. Eva's body jolted upright as if her subconscious had been bracing for it. Disoriented, she stumbled into the hallway, heart pounding. Liana's friends, Jill and Kate, were trembling, half crying, half hyperventilating. "He took her," they gasped. "A man, he had a knife. He took her." The house was filled with a chilling emptiness. Liana was gone. What followed was chaos. Police arrived within minutes, but the intruder had vanished without a trace. No broken windows, no forced doors. Just a mother in pajamas begging for answers and 2 little girls who had seen something they would never forget. According to Jill and Kate, they had been settling in for the night when Liana went to retrieve the inflatable bed from the hall closet. The door opened, and there he was. A man. No mask. No emotion. Just a blade, glinting under the overhead light. At first, they thought it was a prank, a Halloween joke. The way the man stared at them made them laugh nervously, until he didn't laugh back. His eyes were hollow. Not angry. Just dead. Like he was detached from what he was doing. That's when the fear really set in. He barked at them to lie down. When they hesitated, he grew violent. He tied their wrists with something like nylon string, then used pillowcases to cover their heads. They could hear Liana pleading. One of the girls said she heard the word, "please," whispered like a breath before the man told them to count to 1,000. "I'm just taking her for a little while," he said. "She'll be back." But she didn't come back. When Jill and Kate managed to untie themselves, sometime after 1 a.m., they ran to Eva, who was already searching the house in a daze. The front door was unlocked. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood. Just absence. What followed in the next few days was the beginning of one of the largest child abduction searches in the country's history. Thousands of volunteers poured into town. They combed through fields, abandoned sheds, under bridges, behind gas stations. Missing posters went up like wildfire. A sketch of the man, drawn from the girl's memory, was plastered across police bulletins and nightly news. Liana's room became a crime scene. Forensic teams picked through every thread, every fiber. They found carpet fibers that didn't match anything in the house. They were coarse, dark red, automotive carpeting. Whoever had taken her had brought part of his world with him. A single palm print was lifted from the frame of the bedroom door, but without modern database access, it was useless at the time. The print would sit in evidence for years like a silent witness. Even stranger, a strip of silk, patterned and expensive looking, was discovered tucked under the corner of Liana's bed. It wasn't hers. It didn't belong to anyone in the house. Police believed it had been cut from a piece of clothing, perhaps torn in the struggle. Maybe even left behind deliberately. Like a calling card. And then there was the hair, long, black, slightly curled. Not Liana's. Not her mother's. A stranger's. But back then, DNA testing was primitive. The sample was bagged, labeled, stored, and slowly forgotten. Weeks passed. Then months. The seasons changed, but for Eva, time didn't move. The house became a prison of memories, unfinished drawings on the fridge, Liana's schoolbook still stacked beside her bed. Her scent lingered in the hallway. Sometimes, Eva swore she could hear the floorboards creak at night. Not in the usual way, but like someone was tiptoeing back in, unseen. One volunteer searcher claimed to see a figure deep in the woods one night around dusk. A tall man. Standing too still. Watching. But when they shouted and ran toward him, he vanished into the trees like smoke. Another neighbor, an old woman who lived across the street, later told police she had seen a pale figure, barefoot, standing under the streetlight the night Liana disappeared. But her account was dismissed as hallucination from old age. Years later, when forensic technology caught up with the evidence, the palm print and the silk were finally cross-checked. A suspect emerged. A man who had been arrested in another state for a different violent offense. He had no known connection to Liana, no ties to her family, no reason to be there that night. When they finally confronted him, he smiled and said only 4 words. She opened the door. The rest of the story remains buried in silence, sealed in evidence boxes and faded memories. Liana Claus was never found. No body. No confession. Just shadows, suspicion, and the hollow ache of something stolen. Sometimes, Eva still leaves the porch light on. Just in case. It was a quiet autumn night in the small town of Redwood Valley, October 7, 1997. A sense of calm drifted through the streets like the falling leaves, but that peace would be shattered in the hours to come. 12-year-old Polly had invited 2 of her closest friends for a sleepover. Her laughter still echoed faintly in the hallway as the girls settled into their sleeping bags, giggling under dim fairy lights and sharing secrets only children know how to carry. Her mother, Eva, kissed her goodnight with the careless ease of routine, never imagining it might be the last. Just past midnight, that illusion of safety unraveled. Eva was ripped from her sleep by the sound of terrified screams, high-pitched and panicked, the kind that don't sound like mischief or nightmares, but blood-deep fear. She rushed to Polly's room only to find the 2 visiting girls in tears, trembling, and pointing to the empty sleeping bag where Polly should have been. The room was a mess. The window was cracked open. And Polly was gone. The local police swarmed the house within minutes. Flashlights cut through the night. Doors were knocked. Neighbors questioned. Patrols were dispatched. A sketch of a possible suspect, based on the terrified recollections of the 2 girls, was drawn within hours. He was described as a tall man, unshaven, with wild eyes and a slow, unsettling smile. Officers compared the sketch to dozens of known offenders and drivers spotted in the area. Nothing fit. Every second that passed chipped away at their hope of finding Polly alive. Statistically, they knew, the first 24 hours were critical. After that, the odds plummeted. The FBI joined the hunt, launching a massive multi-agency search effort. Flyers went up. Schools were notified. Amber alerts were issued across state lines. Despite the scale of the operation, days bled into weeks, and Polly's trail grew cold. Neighbors recalled something strange. Some had seen a man loitering near the houses in the days before Polly vanished. They said he didn't look homeless or dangerous, just off. Out of place. "I thought maybe he was visiting someone," one said. "He didn't seem threatening. Just odd." When shown the sketch based on Polly's friends' descriptions, every one of those neighbors confirmed it. They had seen him. But none had reported it. The police turned to her school, questioning teachers, janitors, and counselors, anyone who might know the man. No one recognized the face. No one had seen him. The staff were ruled out, each with airtight alibis. Fibers from Polly's room were matched against their cars and clothing, but no hits. Weeks passed, and the community's anxiety curdled into dread. The case caught the eye of the public. People were afraid. If a man could sneak into a child's home and vanish into the night, what did that mean for everyone else? The pressure mounted. The fear spread like rot. A $200,000 reward was announced, put forward by a local philanthropist and a few quietly grieving celebrities. One actress even stood before a sea of cameras, voice cracking as she pleaded for Polly's safe return. But nothing moved the case forward. Not the sketches. Not the search dogs. Not the flood of false leads. It was the early days of the internet. In 1997, few knew how to use it for anything other than emails and crude chat rooms. But 3 California residents, tech hobbyists with bleeding hearts, took it upon themselves to digitize the search. They uploaded Polly's photo. They posted the suspect's sketch. They offered hotline numbers and reward details. The image of a missing girl with soft eyes and a quiet smile spread across email chains and primitive forums. 25 million people saw her face. And still, no trace. No scent. No clue. The investigation stalled, tension growing like a storm cloud above Polly's family. Then, a phone call. Mark, Polly's father, answered the phone to a trembling voice. "Dad, it's me." His heart stopped. The voice was faint, terrified, and unmistakably Polly's. She whispered that she was at a motel, that the man who took her had stepped out for a few minutes, and she had found a phone. Then silence. The line went dead. Mark ran to the police. But in 1997, tracing calls wasn't as instant as it is now. The FBI needed another call to triangulate. Hours later, it came. The same voice, frantic and brief. The trace led officers to a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Not a motel. Inside was a teenage girl, around Polly's age. She was mortified. It had been a dare from her friends, she confessed. Her voice, eerily similar to Polly's, had sparked false hope. The police didn't arrest her. They didn't even take her to the station. Her parents were warned, and she was told never to joke about missing children again. That same week, a woman from the outskirts of town phoned the police about something strange. On a wide piece of wooded land she owned, often wandered through by hikers and trespassers, she had found something near the tree line: silk fabric, duct tape, and a pair of child's ballet slippers. The silk matched Polly's bedroom curtains. The slippers, her mother confirmed, had gone missing that night. Detectives and forensic teams swarmed the area. The land was dense, full of places to hide or bury something, or someone. Then the woman remembered something else. On the very night Polly vanished, a car had gotten stuck in the mud on her property. The nanny saw the man first. He had parked by the side of the house, wheels spinning in the earth. She didn't approach, something in his expression, she said, frightened her. The woman herself had looked through the window and seen his eyes. Dark. Angry. Distant. She, too, backed away and called the police. When the patrol arrived, they found him still trying to free the car. He claimed he hadn't known it was private land. He wasn't hostile. Just strange. They let him go. Now, weeks later, with Polly's belongings found not far from that very spot, the man's name rose again. And this time, no one was letting him go. It was a cold, wet evening in late November 1995 when two patrol officers in rural Northern California came across a vehicle stranded on the edge of a desolate, wooded road. The car was mired in thick mud, its tires spinning uselessly. A lone man stood nearby, waving them down with a frantic urgency. The man's clothes were damp, and his skin glistened with sweat despite the chilly air. Something about him wasn't right, his eyes darted too quickly, his hands trembled, and his words were slurred and unsteady. He claimed he was just trying to get home. That he'd taken a wrong turn and ended up in this forested backroad. But the officers couldn't ignore the deep unease he radiated. He looked frightened. Panicked, almost. Like a man running from something. Or someone. He reeked faintly of alcohol and something else, metallic, almost sickly sweet. Drugs, maybe? They couldn't be sure. Back then, they didn't have the means to conduct a roadside drug test. And despite his unsettling behavior, he wasn't hostile. He wasn't threatening. He was just, twitchy. So they did what protocol demanded, they helped him. Pushed the car out of the mud, watched the tires regain traction, and stood there as he muttered a shaky, thanks, before driving off into the thickening fog. That man was later identified as Richard Alton Darrow. At the time, they didn't know the name. But in the days that followed, it would become etched into the darkest pages of California's criminal history. Richard had been born in 1955 in a crumbling tenement in San Leandro, raised in a home where silence was broken only by screams and the sharp crack of fists on flesh. His father was a man carved out of bitterness, his mother, a ghost of a woman whose own childhood traumas had never healed. When Richard was 12, the violence finally shattered the family completely. His mother left without a goodbye, abandoning him to the whims of his unstable father. He grew up angry, lonely, and unmoored. As a teenager, Richard spent more time on the streets than in school. He learned to steal, to lie, to vanish. Reform school became a revolving door. At 17, he committed a robbery that left his victim nearly crippled. Faced with the choice of military service or confinement, Richard chose the army, only to be discharged in disgrace less than 2 years later. The violence in him couldn't be trained out. It was a part of him. Like a shadow that followed even in the brightest daylight. By his early 20s, Richard had already amassed a criminal record that read like a warning label: robbery, assault, kidnapping. He was sentenced to 15 years for an armed abduction but served only one, released early due to overcrowding and what officials described as good behavior. But that good was only ever surface deep. Around that time, whispers started to follow him, quiet, terrified whispers. A 19-year-old girl named Marlene went missing after attending a small gathering where Richard had also been present. The authorities claimed she'd run away. Her friends insisted otherwise. They were sure Richard had something to do with it. But no body was ever found. Just silence and suspicion. Fast forward to October 1995. A young girl named Emily Harper disappeared from her quiet suburban neighborhood. She was 12. Bright, funny, adored by her classmates. That night, she'd invited 2 friends for a sleepover. Her mother remembered the giggles, the sound of late-night popcorn popping. But then, just after midnight, a scream tore through the house. Emily's mother ran into her daughter's room to find chaos, pillows on the floor, the window wide open, and Emily, gone. What followed was a frantic, heart-wrenching search. Police, volunteers, helicopters. Everyone looking. But no answers came. What they did have was a partial fingerprint on the window frame and a few strands of coarse hair that didn't belong to anyone in the family. Weeks went by. Hope began to fade. What no one knew then was that the man officers had helped free his car from the mud the very next morning was the same man who had taken Emily. She was in the back seat that night, lying low and terrified under a filthy blanket. Still alive. Richard didn't speak of it at first. He was picked up weeks later during a routine traffic stop in mid-November. He was drunk, his eyes glassy, his words nonsensical. The officer asked for ID. Something about the name rang a bell. When the officer radioed in and got confirmation, his blood ran cold. Richard was wanted. Not just for probation violation, but as a suspect in the kidnapping of Emily Harper. He was arrested without incident, and taken in. But once inside the station, once the walls began to close in and the evidence piled up, he began to crack. During a long, grueling interrogation, Richard finally spoke. His voice was flat. Empty. As though the part of him that could feel had long since died. He said he hadn't planned it. He'd been high, meth, mostly, and wandering aimlessly through the neighborhoods just outside Redwood Valley. He saw an open window, and it called to him like an invitation. He climbed in, hoping for valuables, something to pawn. But instead, he found Emily. She'd opened the door. Caught him. And in that moment, something snapped inside him. He took her. Said he didn't even think, just grabbed her, threw her into the car, and drove. They stopped at a clearing in the woods, not far from where his car later got stuck. There, Richard did unspeakable things. Crimes too brutal to fully articulate. Crimes that would haunt the officers who later heard his confession for the rest of their lives. He admitted Emily was still in the car when the officers helped him. She had been hiding beneath a tarp. Silent. Petrified. So close to being saved. So tragically missed. Later that night, he strangled her. Said he couldn't stand the fear in her eyes. Couldn't let her live. He buried her under a pile of stones by the side of an old dirt road, an unmarked grave for a stolen child. It wasn't until January 7, 1996, over 2 months later, that Richard finally gave up the location. Officers found Emily's remains exactly where he'd said they would be. Her small body wrapped in the same silk fabric her mother had sewn into her pillowcase. The case devastated the community. The horror of it never truly faded. Richard Alton Darrow now resides in a maximum security prison. He does not speak to the media. He does not receive visitors. His cell is small, always cold, always dark. Some say he talks to himself at night. Others say he screams. But one thing is certain, on that rain-soaked night in November, while 2 officers were helping a stranded man from the mud, they had no idea they were standing inches away from a monster. A monster who had already stolen a life, and buried the innocence of an entire town beneath the silence of the forest floor. In the dim chill of an early September morning in 2014, the twisted mind of Brett Mercer was already at work. A ticking time bomb hidden behind a mask of a troubled but functioning man. What his neighbors saw as a quiet figure was, in truth, a mind unraveling thread by thread, planning something far more sinister than anyone could have guessed. Brett had recently purchased a crossbow and a quiver of arrows from a sporting goods store on the edge of town. Not for sport. Not for show. But for blood. He carefully stashed them behind the piles of dusty construction debris in his mother's cluttered garage. He had grown clever in the shadows, crafting an alibi so bizarre it bordered on genius, a spoon tied to the blade of a small oscillating fan, set on a timer. When activated, the spoon would tap away at the keyboard on his laptop, sending out pre-written YouTube comments. A digital ghost performing digital echoes. To anyone outside, it would appear that Brett had spent the whole day lost in cyberspace, harmlessly watching videos and commenting like a shut-in recluse. But what he had planned required much more than deception. It required blood. On the morning of September 13th, cloaked in strange, oversized clothes and with his face hidden under a scarf and tinted glasses, Brett slipped out of his house through the back door, avoiding the gaze of nearby security cameras. He boarded a local train to his parents' neighborhood. His steps were slow but certain. His goal clear: eliminate any loose ends that could threaten the life he intended to build with his fiancée, Kristen. His mother, Susan Mercer, was home that day. She wasn't feeling well, and the last person she expected to see standing in her doorway was Brett. There was confusion in her eyes, followed quickly by maternal concern. Brett's face looked different, older, colder. The conversation started simple. He asked her, once again, not to interfere with his relationship. To never mention the things she knew. The secrets. But Susan, resolute in her values, refused. She had seen the darkness slowly taking over her son. She wasn't going to allow it to spread further into someone else's life. Then came the switch. Brett's calm veneer cracked. His voice rose. His eyes widened. Susan backed away, warning him that she had already contacted his younger brother Christopher. He was on his way. That's when Brett snapped. He bolted to the garage, yanking the crossbow from its hiding spot. But his trembling hands and surging adrenaline failed him. He couldn't load it fast enough. He couldn't aim. Rage took over. He swung the crossbow like a club, striking Susan across the head. She crumpled to the floor, groaning weakly. Brett stood over her, panting like a wild animal, his eyes glazed in madness. Then he grabbed a length of rope, wrapped it around her neck, and pulled with everything he had. Her eyes bulged. Her legs kicked once. Then, nothing. He dragged her lifeless body to the back, covered it in plastic bags, and piled heavy boxes over it. Not a trace visible. Not a whisper left behind. And then he waited. Christopher arrived not long after, calling out as he stepped into the yard. "Mom? Brett? Anyone home?" An arrow came from the shadows. Brett had hidden in the dense shrubbery like some forgotten ghost. The arrow whistled, fast, precise, striking Christopher in the neck. He fell to the grass gasping, hands clawing at the shaft. He was dead within minutes. But Susan had called someone else before everything spiraled: Alexander, the youngest of the Mercer brothers. He arrived only moments later. Brett, now deep into his descent, shot again. The arrow struck, but not cleanly. Alexander dropped to the ground screaming, clutching his neck as blood spilled between his fingers. His cries echoed through the garden, through the trees, through the open windows of the house where another brother slept sounded, unaware of the massacre just beyond his door. Leland. Upstairs, in the safety of his dim room, Leland stirred. The scream had torn through his sleep like a nightmare slipping into reality. He rushed to the window, then down the stairs, only to find a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life: Alexander writhing on the floor, Brett towering over him with rope in hand, ready to finish the job. Leland didn't hesitate. He lunged. The brothers struggled, grappling with primal rage and horror. Leland, fueled by shock and a desperate will to survive, managed to shove Brett aside. He ran out the door, screaming, banging on the neighbor's door for help. The police were called. Brett didn't flee. He sat on the kitchen floor, blood on his hands, blood on his clothes, and a void in his eyes. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Kristen. The woman he claimed to love. He opened it and typed a single message. "Please forgive me." When the police stormed in, they found him calmly waiting, next to Alexander's still body. Alexander was rushed to the hospital, still clinging to life, but would slip away a few hours later. Brett raised his hands, asked to be handcuffed, and didn't resist. At the station, He confessed to everything. Told them where his mother's body was, stuffed beneath packages in the garage. His voice was flat, mechanical. He claimed he hadn't meant to kill Susan, only to scare her into silence. But he admitted without hesitation that Christopher and Alexander were planned. Witnesses. Obstacles. If they hadn't shown up, he said, they'd still be alive. His trial in late 2015 was swift but harrowing. No jury could stomach the details. His confession, his planning, his remorse, none of it was enough. The judge sentenced him to 3 life terms, to be served consecutively, with the earliest chance of parole in 2041. Leland, the sole survivor, refused to speak publicly. But his name echoed through Toronto as the boy who faced the devil in his brother and lived. And as for Brett, he sits in a small cell in Millhaven Institution, staring at concrete walls day after day. His hands still shake sometimes. Maybe from memory. Maybe from guilt. Or maybe, from the knowledge that evil isn't born. It's made. One secret at a time. The town of St. Williston never truly recovered. It was a quiet suburb outside Toronto, the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors, where neighbors smiled from across fences and the biggest event in a week might be the church bake sale. But after that September in 2014, the town's name became synonymous with something far darker, the Mercer Massacre. The Mercer house was cordoned off for weeks. Blood still stained the brick steps. Police tape flapped in the autumn wind. Reporters circled like vultures, whispering words like familicide and mental breakdown, but the truth went deeper. This wasn't a sudden snap. This was a long, creeping madness. Years in the making. And nobody saw it. Inside Brett's prison cell, the silence is complete. The only sounds are the occasional clank of metal, the distant echo of a scream from another inmate, and the slow dripping of a faulty pipe near his cot. Every night, he lies awake staring at the ceiling, haunted not by ghosts, but by what he became. In his letters to Kristen, never answered, never opened, he tries to explain himself. Not to earn forgiveness, but to feel human again. He writes about the years leading up to it all. About how he felt watched. Judged. How his mind became a maze of echoing thoughts and paranoia. How his love for her became something twisted. Obsessive. How he thought eliminating his family would somehow clear the path. But even in his letters, there's no mention of the worst part. Because the horror didn't end when Brett was arrested. It only started. After the murders, neighbors began reporting strange occurrences at the Mercer home, before the house was finally torn down in 2016. Flickering lights. Figures in the windows. One old man, walking his dog at dusk, swore he saw a young boy standing in the garden, holding an arrow in his neck, silently mouthing the words, "Help me," before vanishing into the tall weeds. The home, though abandoned, seemed to breathe with grief. And something else. When demolition crews arrived, 3 of them walked off the job within hours. One claimed he heard screaming coming from inside the walls. Another said he found a journal, Brett's, under a loose floorboard in the garage, even though police had already swept the place clean. The last worker never said what he saw, only that he wouldn't return. Not for double pay. Not for anything. And when they finally knocked the house down, the foundation cracked in strange ways, revealing a pattern etched deep into the concrete, a circle of symbols no one could explain. Some said Brett carved them there. Others believed they had always been there, waiting. Even now, years later, the empty lot remains untouched. Overgrown. Claimed by wild thorns and crooked trees. The city tried to sell the land 4 times. Each buyer backed out. Some blamed zoning issues. Others whispered about the curse. Because people still hear things near that place. Especially at night. Soft crying. A rope creaking. And once, just once, a young man's voice, calm, steady, whispering from the bushes, they were in the way. Leland, the only survivor, changed his name. Moved to another province. The newspapers say he works as a night shift security guard at a factory outside Winnipeg. He doesn't talk to the media. He doesn't answer questions. But once, a journalist tracked him down, years after the trial, and waited in the cold outside the building where Leland worked. When he finally came out, the reporter stepped forward and asked, "Do you think Brett was born evil?" Leland stared at him for a long, quiet moment. Then he said something the journalist never forgot. "Evil? No. Evil has a shape. Brett was something else. He was hollow. And the horror? It didn't start with the crossbow. It started with silence. With pretending not to see. With family dinners where everyone smiled while quietly falling apart. Then Leland got into his car and drove off into the snowy dark. The air was warm that evening in May 2014, when Brett sat across from Kristen at a modest outdoor cafe nestled between two rusted buildings. They'd been seeing each other casually for years, both mature enough to understand where things were headed, but Brett had finally decided, he wanted permanence. He wanted Kristen. Not just in his life, but as his wife. He had managed to save up a bit over time and decided to share his intentions with his mother, Susan. The way he spoke that night, with a trembling kind of sincerity, moved her. He told her he planned to propose, not with extravagance, but with honesty. Kristen, he said, didn't need diamonds to be happy. She needed truth. Love. Commitment. Still, Susan, always one to want better for her son, handed him a small envelope, her savings, telling him to buy a ring that would make Kristen's heart skip. Brett, swayed by a quiet desperation to prove he could be someone worthy, bought a gold ring with a glimmering diamond that sparkled like the life he wanted but wasn't sure he could afford. When Brett proposed to Kristen under the pale light of a street lamp in early June, she said yes with tears in her eyes. It was everything he had imagined. For a while, everything felt perfect. They began planning their wedding soon after, and Kristen handled the details with ease while Brett nodded through every suggestion, hiding the tightening in his chest. The costs were adding up fast, and the pressure began to gnaw at him like rust on metal. Feeling the ground shift beneath him, Brett scrambled for stability. He found an online listing for an engineering position at a well-regarded tech firm, something that matched his degree and aspirations. He stayed up nights polishing his resume, prepping for the interview. Then the call came. He had been selected. A dream opportunity. He rushed to tell Kristen and his mother. They cried with joy. Wanting to look the part, Brett asked Susan once again for money, this time for a suit. She gave it, believing it was an investment in his future. But the dream shattered only a week later. A call from the company came. Their security team had dug up Brett's past, details buried but not forgotten. A juvenile record. A small-time fraud case. Nothing dangerous, but enough to stain his name. The offer was rescinded. The silence after that call was suffocating. Brett sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall, unable to move. The walls felt closer. His lungs struggled to fill. A sense of doom settled over him like a fog. One rejection led to another. His past followed him like a shadow, dragging behind him no matter how fast he ran. He started skipping classes. His university grades plummeted. Eventually, he dropped out. But he told no one. Each morning, Brett dressed in a suit and left the house, pretending to go to work. But instead, he went to paint houses in the far corners of town, dirty, thankless work that barely paid enough for gas. On social media, he posted filtered pictures of sleek offices, swiped from the internet. He even faked calls at family dinners, pretending to discuss projects and clients. A year passed. By July 2016, the wedding plans were in full swing. Brett had told so many lies, they had become his reality. He rented an upscale venue, $100 per guest. The kind of place with crystal chandeliers and velvet-lined menus. Kristen beamed with pride. Her Brett had made it. But money was bleeding out of him. He borrowed again from Susan. Again. Again. Until she said no more. In a fit of desperation, he told her she needed to get a higher-paying job. He didn't recognize the venom in his voice, but she did. Her eyes watered, not from the insult, but from something deeper. A mother's sense of unease. The weight of deception began to crack his bones. In late July, a week before the wedding, Brett confessed to his therapist that he hadn't been working as an engineer. That everything was a lie. The counselor urged him to tell his family. So, he did. When Susan heard the truth, something inside her broke. She had spoken proudly of her son to everyone. Her co-workers. Neighbors. Church friends. "My Brett works in tech," she would say with a glow in her eyes. That glow dimmed as she sat motionless on the couch, hands clasped, heart heavy. "You must tell Kristen," she told him, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you don't, I will." Brett's brothers already knew. They backed Susan, and now Brett had nowhere to run. He rehearsed how he would tell Kristen. But every time he looked at her smile, so innocent, so trusting, he choked on the truth. Time was up. The wedding was 3 days away. Every call Kristen received made Brett twitch. He expected her to scream at any moment, to confront him with the truth. But each call was about flowers or photographers or cake flavors. He began to unravel. The lies were strangling him. At night, he couldn't sleep. His thoughts were filled with blood. With shadows. With death. In the attic, he found something old. Wrapped in a dusty tarp, it had once belonged to his late father, a hunting crossbow. Brett remembered how his father used to teach him to shoot. "Aim for the heart, son. It's the fastest way." That night, something inside Brett snapped. He decided that the only way out was through silence. Not a conversation. Not a confession. But an end. He chose the crossbow. Silent. Cold. Efficient. No gunpowder. No noise. No warning. Just a breath, and then stillness. He began planning. August 5, 2016. The wedding day. The date engraved on invitations, etched on welcome signs, embroidered into tablecloths. But that day never came. 2 nights before the ceremony, Brett vanished. Kristen thought it was cold feet, but then Susan called the police. She knew. Deep down, she knew it wasn't just cold feet. 3 days later, hikers in the Black Pine Forest found Brett's car abandoned near an old ranger cabin. Inside the trunk were photos, ripped-up pieces of wedding invitations, and a wedding suit soaked in blood. Nearby, under a tree, was a body. A bolt lodged deep in the chest. Hands pale. Lifeless. The ring Kristen had once worn rested beside the body. No one knows who placed it there. Some say it was Brett himself. Others believe it was never meant for her at all. To this day, locals speak of the cabin with unease. They say sometimes, on quiet nights, you can hear footsteps on dry leaves, and a voice whispering, "It was supposed to be perfect." But nothing ever is. In the quiet, frost-laced winter of December 2002, a man named Brett Ryerson sat alone inside his rusted old sedan, parked on the outskirts of a forgotten Ontario town. The heater coughed warm air in fits, struggling against the biting cold outside. His eyes, sleepless and sunken, remained fixed on the rearview mirror, not out of habit, but of constant fear. Every shadow could be a cop. Every headlight beam behind him might mean the end. Brett had never envisioned himself as a criminal. Once a university student with dreams of becoming an artist, he found himself sinking into the unforgiving quicksand of debt. Creditors harassed him. Job interviews turned into rejections. And the heartbreaks, 2 relationships gone painfully wrong, left him emotionally gutted. He wasn't just broke. He was empty. By the time January 2003 rolled in, Brett had made a decision that would forever alter his name, and stain his family's legacy. He calculated it methodically. Robbing at least 60 banks would be necessary to clear the mountain of debt that crushed him. It sounded insane, even to him. But desperation is a powerful architect of delusion. And Brett, in that moment, became its blueprint. The first robbery happened in a dusty suburb bank, small staff, easy access, minimal resistance. No gun. No knife. Just a heavy winter coat, a fake beard he'd bought from a party store, and a note demanding the cash. It worked. He walked out with $2,400 in a bag and heartbeats pounding in his ears like war drums. For days after that he didn't go home. He told his mother he'd taken a painting job in another town. In truth, he spent nights curled up in the back seat of his car, parking in dark alleys, peeking around corners before creeping home just long enough to change and check for police. The silence gave him confidence. He was invisible, or so he believed. The second robbery went smoother. Then a third. And a fourth. Each time, Brett altered his look, switching outfits from thrift stores, or even digging into trash bags behind shopping plazas. He would burn the clothes afterward, the smoke rising like a confession whispered to the night. Toronto media began to murmur about the bearded bandit. Surveillance footage, witness sketches, all described the same trademark, that uncanny, mismatched beard that seemed too cartoonish to be real. But despite the press, Brett never made more than $3,000 at a time. He was digging a well with a spoon. Then, his luck began to rot. In April 2003, investigators caught a lead. Surveillance footage captured a partial license plate of a car matching his. It was traced to a house. His house. No arrests were made, though. The police decided to surveil him instead. For 2 weeks, plainclothes officers followed Brett's every move, hiding in shadows, jotting notes, watching. Brett sensed something. The thrill of the heists faded into paranoia. Days passed. Then weeks. He stopped robbing. Some officers began thinking they'd hit a dead end. Maybe they had the wrong guy. Maybe the real bearded robber had vanished like a ghost. But then came a cold, gray morning in late May. Brett left his house wearing a costume unlike any other. Clown pants, oversized sunglasses, and a leather trench coat. It was absurd. But it worked, he thought. At 9:41 a.m., he stepped into another bank branch. Inside, he stood quietly, surveying the cameras and clerks like a seasoned actor blocking out a stage scene. When he left, officers moved swiftly, emerging from behind parked cars like shadows birthed by daylight. Brett didn't resist. He knew the show was over. The arrest made headlines across Ontario, the bearded bandit caught after 7-month crime spree. In total, 19 charges were filed against him, armed robbery among them. Ironically, Brett never carried a weapon. Not even a kitchen knife. He had a valid firearm license but never brought the gun. His terror was enough to paralyze the clerks. In court, Brett's family was stoic but crumbling. His mother, Susan Ryerson, who once tended to the town's most praised garden, now found herself the subject of gossip, whispers, and cruel notes left at her doorstep. They fought the charges. After a year of legal back and forth, only 8 of the 19 counts were upheld. Still, Brett was sentenced to prison. While behind bars, he began attending sessions with a prison psychologist. He wrote long letters, unsent, to his mother, his exes, even to the bank tellers he once terrified. His isolation was both punishment and therapy. But he changed. He grew quiet. Thoughtful. Fragile. In November 2006, Brett was released on parole. But freedom, it turned out, wasn't salvation. No one wanted to hire a former bank robber. Not even for basic labor. A house painting gig fell through when a client recognized him. Neighbors whispered when Susan walked down the street. "That's the robber's mother," they said, as if it were a title. Eventually, the Ryersons sold their house and moved to Scarborough, where Susan started over with a new garden, blooming defiantly from soil salted with judgment. Brett found work at a small trading company, thanks to a kind-hearted manager who didn't Google his name. The job paid little. His parents helped when they could. He returned to university classes. And, slowly, he rebuilt. Then came Kristen Baxter. She was radiant. Fiercely independent. She had a seafront apartment where they'd watch the waves crash against the rocks like time itself trying to shatter. She didn't care about Brett's past. In fact, she believed in his future. They traveled together. Australia. South Africa. Vancouver. Places Brett once only saw in brochures from bank waiting rooms. Life was finally taking shape again. But then death came knocking. In March 2009, Brett's father passed away from a silent heart attack. The grief was a knife with no handle. It cut through everything, his stability, his therapy progress, his relationship. The sadness crept in like fog. He began seeing the psychologist again, this time with heavier silence. Money ran thin. His mother leaned on him more. He tried. God knows he tried. Kristen urged him to move forward. "Let's get married," she said once, a hopeful whisper against the weight of his past. But Brett couldn't say yes. Not yet. He was haunted, not just by what he did, but by how close he'd come to getting away with it. He often dreamed of that last heist, the flickering lights, the cold floor beneath his shoes, the mirror behind the clerk that showed a man he no longer recognized. There's an urban legend now in parts of Ontario. They say if you go near one of the old bank branches late at night, and the wind is sharp enough, you might see a figure, a man with a beard not quite right, standing motionless in the shadows. No one knows if Brett still lives in Scarborough. Some say he moved away with Kristen. Others claim he vanished completely after his mother's passing. But a local paper once ran an anonymous letter, signed only, B. It read, "There are some debts money can't pay. And some ghosts that won't be buried." It was a misty spring morning in southern India, the kind that makes the air feel thick and secrets seem more ancient. Along the banks of a dense riverbed, wrapped in the echoing calls of crows and the silence of mangrove roots, a passerby discovered something grim. A human body. Or what was left of it. The limbs were torn off, almost surgically. The skull had rolled several feet away, resting beside a cracked cigarette box, a lighter, and a half-empty bottle of packaged drinking water. These items lay scattered like forgotten tokens of a final moment lived in terror. Whatever happened here had been brutal, sudden, and cruel. Locals who heard about the scene whispered of black magic, wild animals, or worse, what they called jungle spirits. But the truth, as always, was hidden in shadows. Authorities arrived that same morning. They sealed off the area and gathered the few fragments of evidence. The remains, those fragile and broken remnants of what was once a living soul, were sent to the morgue. What little fabric clung to the body, sweat-washed yoga tights, a faded herbal clinic t-shirt, helped them begin to piece together the identity. Her name was Liga Skriner. She was 33. But who was Liga before she became a body by the river? She was born far from this humid jungle, somewhere in Eastern Europe, in 1988. Raised in a large household with a kind-hearted older brother and a fiercely loyal younger sister, Liga had always been the quiet one. Dreamy. Sensitive. She felt too deeply and often kept her battles silent. After moving to Ireland in her 20s, Liga met a man named Andrew. Their love wasn't a storm but a slow-burning candle, steady, warm, and enduring. She worked in a modest hotel and lived simply, but her heart was elsewhere. Liga dreamed of founding a yogic healing retreat, somewhere peaceful, maybe the sunlit cliffs of Portugal. 4 years, she and Andrew saved every cent. They didn't go out. They didn't travel. Their sacrifices were made for a dream that hovered just over the horizon. But dreams can sour. By early 2021, Liga began suffering from an intense skin condition, one that left her not only physically scarred but emotionally wrecked. She retreated inward, her mind growing heavier with each passing week. Her sister, Elsa, suggested something that might help, a wellness journey, far from the gray skies of home. She proposed Kerala, India. The two sisters arrived in February 2021, seeking healing in the soft-spoken world of Ayurveda. They checked into a serene clinic in Kovalam, a beach town that smelled of salt and sandalwood. Their days were spent meditating, sipping herbal decoctions, practicing yoga, and lying in the stillness of oil-dripping treatments. But something wasn't right. Liga had started withdrawing again. Her smiles grew faint. Her voice, once melodic, was now barely a whisper. On the morning of March 17, she told her sister she felt a headache coming on and would skip their yoga session. Elsa went alone, trusting her sister would rest and join her later. She never did. By noon, Liga's room was empty. Her bed untouched. Her belongings in place, but she was gone. The hotel receptionist recalled seeing her leave around 11:30 a.m., climbing into an auto rickshaw headed toward Kovalam Beach. Dressed in yoga leggings and a clinic t-shirt, she said she just wanted a walk, maybe some air. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Elsa panicked. She spent the entire day combing the shoreline, showing photos of Liga to tourists, to fruit vendors, to beach dogs. No one recognized her. That was odd. Liga was a tall, pale woman in a predominantly local crowd. Someone should have noticed her. But it was as if she vanished into thin air. When Elsa rushed to the local police station that evening, her heart pounding, the officers didn't even look up from their desks. They muttered that the girl would return by morning, perhaps she had simply wandered off. They dismissed the mention of Liga's depression. They didn't register urgency. They registered paperwork. 2 more days passed. Nothing. The sisters' dream trip had now turned into a slow-motion nightmare. It wasn't until Liga's husband, Andrew, flew into India and stormed into the station that the case was finally taken. Seriously. The investigation kicked off, but it was too late. Whatever clues had existed were already swallowed by time, jungle, and apathy. When Liga's remains were discovered weeks later by that riverbank, her family already knew. Her sister felt it in her bones. Andrew had stopped believing in happy endings. The autopsy was inconclusive. The authorities called it an unfortunate accident, suggesting a fall, maybe wild animals. But her family never believed it. Liga had traveled across India many times. She wasn't reckless. And nothing could explain the condition of her remains. The surgical nature of the dismemberment. The missing personal items. The absence of blood trails. Locals murmured of something sinister. They spoke of a hermit who lived deep in the forest, who believed in ancient rituals that required pure foreign sacrifice. Others pointed to the rising number of missing foreign women in the region, disappearances that always ended in tragedy, if they ended at all. Liga's story faded from the public eye. The beach returned to its laughter and sunbathers. The clinic kept running. The same room she vanished from was soon filled with another tourist seeking peace. But the ghosts linger. Elsa left India with half her soul. Andrew never returned. And on stormy nights, when the winds howl through the palm groves of Kovalam, some say you can hear a whisper coming from the trees near that riverbank. A whisper that doesn't sound quite human. Some believe it's Liga, still looking for the peace that was promised, but never found. The sky was a faded gray over the coastal town of Kovalam when Liga Skirn vanished into the wind. It was early March of 2017, a time when tourists came seeking sun, sea, and a touch of freedom. But for Liga, it was meant to be a journey of healing. A quiet escape from the chaos in her mind, a mind clouded by a history of depression, a sense of alienation, and a fragile will to keep going. Her sister, Diana, back in Latvia, had been her lifeline. When Liga stopped replying to messages, didn't call, and missed their usual video chats, a dull alarm began ringing in Diana's chest. But within 3 days, that dull alarm turned into full-blown panic. By the 8th day, Liga's name was all over Latvian social media. Her photo was plastered across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Diana had tagged every news outlet she could think of. She even tweeted directly to India's then foreign minister, pleading, "Please help me. My sister is missing. We're desperate. We're losing hope." With no choice but to act, Diana flew to India, determined to bring her sister home, or at the very least, to find answers. She was joined by Liga's friend, Alexa, who had also traveled to the country recently and was just as shaken by the news. They walked the narrow lanes of Kovalam, past busy stalls and fishermen gutting their day's catch, asking everyone if they had seen the pale woman with long brown hair and sad eyes. Together, they put up flyers across the beachside district, pinning posters to utility poles and slipping them under hotel doors. "Missing tourist," the posters read in bold, black ink. A reward of 100,000 Indian rupees was promised to anyone who could provide a credible lead. Some locals showed sympathy. Others just stared and moved on. Liga, after all, was a foreigner. Just another face in the blur of transient travelers. But one crucial detail lingered at the heart of the mystery. Liga had vanished without her passport, and she was last seen heading alone toward the beach in an auto rickshaw. She carried 8,000 Indian rupees in cash. And then, nothing. No trace. No footprints. No signal. Just absence. The local police, under the command of Inspector Ashok Menon, initially dismissed the case. "She probably went off on her own," they said. "Maybe a bender. Maybe she'll be back." That narrative didn't sit right with Diana or Andrew, Liga's partner. They refused to believe she had just wandered off without telling anyone. But then, a whisper of something darker began to take root. Andrew suspected she'd been taken, abducted, possibly trafficked by local gangs operating under the radar of sleepy beach towns. His instincts led him deep into the criminal underworld. He tried, recklessly, to question gang affiliates, posing as a desperate foreigner willing to pay for information. But his snooping got him noticed. A warning was issued: stop digging, or leave India. He was forced to step back, but not for long. Weeks passed. The trail ran cold. Diana continued her tireless search, walking the stretch of Samudra beach every morning, her eyes scanning the faces of strangers. She couldn't explain it, but something told her Liga hadn't simply left, she had been taken from somewhere no one was looking. Then, one day, she spotted a small boat bobbing quietly offshore, seemingly forgotten. That's when the theory struck her like a lightning bolt: what if Liga had been taken away by boat? It was the only way she could have left the beach unseen. On April 17, Andrew returned to India after a brief, forced hiatus. The search resumed, this time more methodical, more desperate. The Latvian embassy had already been involved, coordinating efforts with Indian authorities, who now began deploying more resources. Under pressure from both governments, even the Indian Navy and Air Force joined in. Sonar-equipped boats, divers, aerial surveys. It became one of the most extensive searches ever mounted for a missing foreigner in the region. But the sea kept its secrets. Then, 3 days later, on April 20th, Liga's phone, now in Diana's possession, rang. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. A body had been found, tangled in the roots of a mangrove forest near Panada, a place reachable only by boat from Samudra beach. Diana and Andrew rushed to the site. The jungle loomed like something out of a nightmare, thick with shadows and buzzing flies. A narrow canoe took them across the still water. As they approached the edge, the stench of rot hit them like a wall. Diana's hands trembled uncontrollably. And then she saw the body. It was bloated and barely intact, with the head lying a few feet from the torso. The face was unrecognizable. But the shirt, the same one Liga had worn the day she vanished, was still on the corpse. The leggings, too. The shoes, however, didn't belong to her. Nor did the jacket. That raised 1,000 new questions. 2 women from a nearby village came forward, claiming they had seen a lone woman enter the mangroves weeks ago. They didn't stop her, why would they? But that woman matched Liga's description. Still, something didn't add up. Liga had a severe anxiety disorder. She struggled to interact with strangers, let alone venture alone into an isolated swamp with no guide, no food, and no motive. Why would she go there? An autopsy was ordered. The body was transferred to the medical college morgue, where it was examined under video surveillance. The police couldn't confirm her identity until DNA tests were completed. But privately, they were already assuming the worst. The medical report was unsettling. The body had been mutilated. Not just by natural decay, but with force, deliberate trauma. Her skull had been cracked. Her arms dislocated. The police floated a theory, perhaps she ate a fruit from the poisonous pong-pong tree, native to the mangrove. Between 1989 and 1999, more than 500 people had died from it in the Kerala region alone. But Diana knew her sister. Liga wouldn't eat wild fruit, not in that state of mind. Not ever. Andrew clung to a darker belief: she had been kidnapped, abused, and left to die. Perhaps even murdered as part of a ritual, or trafficked and then discarded when her captors felt the heat of international scrutiny. No one could explain how her body ended up in a location impossible to reach without assistance. No one knew who helped her get there. And no one could explain the eerie silence that followed her disappearance, how not a single camera caught her exit, and how a woman could vanish into the jungle without making a single sound. The horror didn't end with the autopsy. It still lingers on Kovalam's shores, in the silence of the waves, the hush of the mangroves, and the hollow stare of the woman on the missing poster still fluttering on a lamppost years later. To this day, no one truly knows what happened to Liga Skirn. Only the jungle does. And the jungle does not speak. It started with a phone call no one should ever receive, a breathless voice on the other end, trembling, saying the words, "They found a body, but there's no head." The forest where she was discovered wasn't a place known to many. Deep, tangled, and whispering with the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise, it sat just beyond the edge of a forgotten beach town in southern India. Tourists came for the sea. But that place, where roots twisted like veins and the air always smelled damp, wasn't for postcards. It was where secrets went to rot. Her name was Liga. A 33-year-old traveler from a small European country, seeking solace, maybe escape. No one knows exactly what led her to that remote land, but she arrived with a restless soul and vanished with no sound. Her sister, Mira, had felt the shift the moment Liga stopped replying to her texts. Days passed. Then a week. Mira began reaching out, online pleas, desperate tweets to foreign embassies, emotionally raw messages on every platform she could find. She was terrified, not because Liga was missing, though that was horror enough, but because she knew something terrible had happened. When they found the body, hanging upside down in the roots of an old banyan tree, the jungle swallowed half the truth already. No head. Just a torso, bruised and decayed. The arms twisted at unnatural angles. Legs torn. Next to the corpse lay a lighter, some packaged water, and a crushed pack of cigarettes. Trinkets of life. Or maybe relics of a struggle. At first, the local police mumbled the usual phrases. She must have taken her own life. She had a history of mental health issues. It was lazy. Convenient. Cold. But Mira wouldn't let them bury the truth. "Don't tell me her head is lost," she snapped in a live-streamed appeal. "My sister didn't kill herself. Someone killed her, and you want to hide it." Forensic reports arrived slowly, and when they did, they were devastating. There were blood clots in Liga's brain. Blunt trauma. Bruises around her throat. Marks that looked like multiple sets of fingers had pressed down hard on her neck. The cartilage in her throat was shattered. They had strangled her. Not once. But in a struggle. There were signs of resistance, bruises, cuts, defensive wounds on her legs. 9 injuries in total, some fresh, some old. It wasn't just a murder. It was violent. Personal. Cruel. Then, whispers began in the alleys of the coastal town. People spoke in hushed tones about 2 men, Amesh and Umar, small-time drug dealers with long shadows behind them. Amesh, 32, was known for hosting gatherings in that same forest, where tourists were taken, used, and forgotten. 13 cases already hung around his neck like nooses, 6 for assault, 1 for attempted murder. Someone said they saw Liga walking toward that part of the jungle. Alone. Another said they saw her speaking with the men the night before. But no witness wanted to stand tall. Fear, here, spoke louder than justice. Eventually, under the pressure of mounting global outrage and Myra's relentless campaigning, the police made their move. Amesh and Umar were arrested. But what came next was worse than anyone imagined. Interrogated brutally, both men confessed, then recanted. In their first confessions, they admitted to offering Liga a joint laced with something far more dangerous. Once she lost control, they took turns abusing her. She resisted. Fought back. That enraged them. They strangled her until she stopped breathing. Then, in a horrific final act, they decapitated her to hide the identity. Her head, they said, was thrown into the sea. The authorities were slow, almost reluctant. Myra's husband, Andrew, filed a petition demanding the trial move forward. He believed others were involved, perhaps even a cover-up to protect tourism in the region. But the courts delayed. Once, then again. No reason given. Just silence. The kind that Mira had come to fear the most. Then came a chilling revelation. In a back room, sealed by humidity and time, officers found a phone. On it, a video. Grainy, muffled, but real. Liga's voice, weak, trembling, pleading. The camera cut before anything more was seen. But it was enough. Enough to break Mira completely. She stopped speaking to reporters. Stopped posting online. Some say she still walks near the coastline of her homeland, alone, whispering her sister's name. Liga's murder, though officially closed, remains tangled in shadows. The 2 men were charged with murder, poisoning, kidnapping, sexual assault, and destruction of evidence. But the real question, why, still haunts everyone who followed the case. Some believe it was a ritual. Others think she saw something she wasn't meant to see. But what everyone agrees on is this: Liga did not go into that forest alone. And she never left. Even now, locals avoid that area after dark. Some say they hear footsteps crunching leaves, though no one's there. Others say the tree where she was found still weeps a reddish sap from its roots, as though the earth remembers what the world tried to forget. And Mira? She still waits. Not for justice. But for her sister's head. Because in horror like this, closure is a myth.